Okay, good afternoon, my dear friends. Let me welcome you to an online class. This is supposed to be an interactive session, and for the first time, I am meeting you on Google Meet. Uh, Today, I am going to discuss certain topics that I have already circulated amongst you. I am going to talk about Kamala Das. As you all know, that I have already given you ample materials on this poet. I have on my YouTube channel uploaded not only introduction to post-colonial and Indian English poetry, but also an introduction to Kamala Das. I have discussed the salient features of her poetry. I have already discussed the 5 poems that are on your syllabus, namely The Descendants, The Old Playhouse, The Dance of the Eunuchs, Very Poor Peril in Insanity, and The Millennials at Marine Drive. So today, I am going to talk about certain topics that I consider to be very, very significant in any understanding of Kamala Das from the perspective of gender and sexuality, because if you remember in your fourth semester, PG fourth semester, Kamala Das has been covered on the in the paper on gender and literature. So today I am going to deal with certain topics that I have already circulated. For the sake of our discussion, let me tell you about the topics first. I am going to talk about Kamala Das's treatment of the theme of gender. Kamala Das's treatment of the theme of sexuality. Her treatment of the theme of memory, how she uses memory, treats memory, dwells on memory. Similarly, I am going to talk about the use of images in her poetry, especially with reference to the poems that are on your syllabus, that I have already pointed out. Then I am going to talk about the encounter between the self and the society that Kamala Das talks about in her Avra, poetic Avra. And I'm also going to talk about the use of allusions. Kamala Das in her poetry often uses allusions, refers to certain things, and I'm going to talk about them as well. Now, there can be also 2 important poems that this year I am going to discuss, that are the Descendants on the one hand and the Dance of the Eunuchs. Now, so far as the close reading of these 2 poems are concerned, because I have already dealt with them in some detail in my foregoing discussions that you can find in my YouTube on my YouTube channel. So I am not going to bother too much about them. Obviously, I will have to refer to them in the past. So the first thing that I would like to mention is the interconnection between each of the topics. You will see that any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of gender cannot be done without reference to her treatment of sexuality. Any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of memory can never be done without a reference to both gender roles and gender expectations. And the question of sexuality, because the experiences that she has had throughout her life, insofar as sexuality is concerned, has shaped the kind of person she has become and the kind of poet that she professes to be. Similarly, any discussion of poetry will be incomplete, to say the least, if we don't discuss the use of stylistic and thematic ploys. Images have to be used, allusions have to be referred to, certain extra textual things have to be referred to in order to build up the context and the comparisons. Similarly, any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of self and society can never be done without a corresponding discussion of her poetic credo. So these are the things that I am going to deal with. I don't think I will be able to discuss all the topics in this class. I am going to talk about them one by one, and let me start with Kamala Das's treatment of the theme of gender. Now, it is a truism of feminist thought that sex is biologically determined, whereas gender is socially acquired. A woman, actually, a girl is born, someone is born a girl and becomes a woman, ultimately. So, sexually, she is female, and gender-wise, she is woman. Why? Because there are certain gender rules and there are certain gender expectations. Now, these gender rules are based on the gender expectations that society always has of. In your honors days, many of you have read Kamala Das's poem, An Introduction. And in this context, let me also tell you that I have already discussed an introduction, and it will be uploaded very soon on my YouTube channel. So those who are interested can also watch that video and listen to the discussion. In an introduction, Kamala Das talks about the various gender roles. Be wife, be cook, be a quarreler with servants, be Amy, be Kamala, or better still, be Madhavi Kutty. Belong, choose a name, a role. So these are the things that Kamala Das's society, the society she was born into, and the society that she had lived in, actually expected of her. And in these 5 points that we have chosen for our study, the descendants, the old playhouse, the dance of the eunuchs, millionaires at Marine Drive, very poor parallel insanity. All these poems in some way or another talk about the gender roles and Kamala Das's treatment of the gender roles and the gender expectations. Now, in any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of gender, the poems that will be more important for you to discuss will be obviously the old playhouse, the millionaires at Marine Drive to some extent, and also to a great extent, very pure brother. Just think about it. See, in the old playhouse is a multivalent symbol. On the one hand, the old playhouse is the mind of the poet. On the other hand, it can also be the marital house, the house that the woman persona dwells in, along with her husband. In many cases, the hated husband. Why? Because the patriarchal society within the familial space is represented by the husband figure. And the woman persona is taught to perform certain wifely duties. The task of the woman, each of the tasks are varied, but they are all tasks of the woman, the wife. Breaking saccharin into the tea, giving vitamins at the appointed hours, um, listening to all the hectoring of the male figure, the husband figure, and mumbling incoherent replies of consent or compromise. And similarly, remaining tamed as a tamed swallow, a domesticated animal. And also responding to the sexual advances through her shallow convulsions. All these things are associated with, connected to the role of the woman. So far as the peripueral insanity is concerned, the task of motherhood is there. Now, it is a sexual task, engaging in sexual intercourse, becoming pregnant, giving birth to a child, and to mother the child, to rear him up or her up. All these things are tasks. In some ways, they are sexual. Now, if we talk about these things, physically speaking, sexually speaking, there are certain ways in which these are basically specific roles, specific tasks that the female body alone can perform. Yes, I know that. We all know that. But similarly, there are certain gendered roles of the woman. For example, rearing the child. Patriarchal society has stipulated this in such a way that the male is not so very concerned, so much concerned with the rearing of the child compared to the female, compared to the woman person, the mother. Sometimes, however, patriarchal society, they are also acting through the husband figure, exerts a heavy toll by taking away the child. And in this way also, society forces the woman persona, the mother, to conform to the expectations that society has of her. So far as millennials at marine drive is concerned, remember, in millennials at marine drive, again, the pining for love that the woman persona suffers from has got both gender and sexual dimensions to this. Obviously, the sexual dimension is, in a way, very, very straightforward. As it has been mentioned in even old playhouse, the old playhouse, the poor lust and the robust lust of the woman, the male figure, that embalms the whole lust, through the bittersweet juices. So, any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of gender, if you really want to make your answer to the point and also of a good quality, you will have to think about the structure of your response. First thing we have to understand is gender roles and gender expectations. That can only be done if we define and characterize gender as a social category. Then obviously you have to point out how Kamala Das is a woman poet. So naturally, her treatment of the gender in her poetry is very, very apt to figure very prominently in any discussion. And obviously, in the case of Kamala Das, because she is a woman, the gender perspective, the gender issue has been dealt with from the perspective of a woman. So, if you have any of you have any question regarding Kamala Das's treatment of gender, you can ask me. Now, I will actually request you to consider this. Whether you want to ask me questions now or you ask questions later on. You keep the questions and I will, Nirupam will actually collect all the questions and he will later on tell me about the questions that you may put and I will answer them in any subsequent discussion. But if you want me to answer your questions now and here, I am prepared for that. So one of you just tell me which approach would you like to follow? Come on, any one of you? ওরা কি কোয়েশ্চেন করেছে কেউ? না দেখ, একটা কথা বলছি, যেহেতু সময়টার একটা পাবন্দি আছে, তাই আমরা মানে ডিসকাশনটা চালিয়ে যেতে পারি। উই ক্যান গো অন উইথ দ্য ডিসকাশন এন্ড দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন্স ক্যান বি আস্কড লেটার অন। আমার মনে হয় সেটাই ভালো হবে। আচ্ছা, আমাকে তো স্পষ্ট দেখা যাচ্ছে তো, আশা করা যায়, আর কথাও তো স্পষ্ট শোনা যাচ্ছে বোধহয়। আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে। So I think we can go on to discuss Kamala Das's treatment of sexuality. Can we? I think we can. Well, any discussion of sexuality as regards the poetic works of a woman poet or male poet or any poet for that can never be discussed in its entirety without recourse to gender issues. Because gender and sexuality, even though they are different, they are closely intertwined. Now, in any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of sexuality in her poetry, you will see, so far as the selection that we have to deal with in this semester is concerned, The poems that we have to point out are obviously the descendants will be one of the key points. Then the old playhouse again will have to feature. The millionaires at Marine Drive again. And we can also tangentially discuss some bits of the dance of the universe. Now, again, there are expectations and also gendered expectations, both of the woman persona and of the society that she lives in, inhabits. See, think about the descendants. We all know that in the descendants, she talks about spending a youth in gentle sinning. How she has, along with her other gender equals, she has lain. So we have lain. So they have lain in every way. They were not nailed to crosses, but nailed all the same. They were nailed all the same. They were nailed to soft beds and against softer forms. So when they were engaging in this sexual abandon, the hours, the thieving hours had passed. And all of a sudden, without knowing it properly, the implications, without the implications being properly understood, they have lost their youth. And similarly, they have lost their market value. In the case of the woman, it has got an added dimension because of the procreation factor. We all know that after a certain age, women cannot bear children. So obviously, childbirth being a temporary phase in a woman's life that has been directly or indirectly drawn upon by the poet in her poetry. Just one second. Hello? Hello? আমি ক্লাসে আছি। Where was I? Yes. I was talking about the woman personas temporary ability to bear children. And as a result, what happened was that she could not look back at her youth and the sexual excesses of that youth without a tinge of remorse. That is why at the very beginning of the poem, The Descendants, she makes a very direct reference to her youth, the youth of the women. But that this was in the case of the woman or women for that matter, not always an act of free will can very easily be understood if we read this poem, The Descendants, between the lines. In another poem, The Stone Age, taken from the old playhouse and other poems, Kamala talks about what is the bliss and what its price. So the bliss of sexual excess and its price. This price may be both physical, pregnancy and childbirth, as it has been in an introduction. He did not beat me, but my sad woman's body felt so beaten. The burden of my womb crushed me. So obviously that is a physical dimension of this price. Similarly, there is another dimension of sex for women especially. That is shame. This shame is, if you can very easily understand, shame is itself a cultural construct. What is shameful for women may not be shameful for men. Because men, as you know, Mamachi in The God of Small Things said, men have their own needs. So their needs, their sexuality is often condoned, tolerated, and even valorized by society. It's not the case with women. Okay. Coming back to other points that we have to discuss. You see, even in the old playhouse, the urge of the woman to fly, the urge of the woman for freedom, this urge has been brutally bulldozed by patriarchal society. Similarly, the question of choice that has always been denied to them. You remember in Shah Rukh Khan starrer film, I don't remember, was it Paheli? You remember about this ghost, the ghost being the lover of the woman? নিরূপম কোন ফিল্ম ছিল যেন? হ্যাঁ
স্যার পেহেলি ছিল স্যার, ওটা শাহরুখ খানের
পেহেলি। হ্যাঁ, ওইখানে ওই ফিল্মটায় একটা দারুণ কথা বলা হয়েছে। বলছিল the woman said that nobody has given me the choice. আমার কথা তো কেউ কোনোদিন জিজ্ঞেস করেনি। আমার কাকে ভালো লাগে, আমার কোনটা ভালো লাগে সেটা কেউ জিজ্ঞেস করেন। This is a very significant, even in Nala Mandal on that plane, the same thing has been pointed out. You remember, you read this poem, The Old Playhouse, and it is very disturbing poem that shows how the husband figure not only tames the swan, forcing her to forget the urge to fly and the endless pathways of the sky, but also keeps her in a guarded, in a confined room, just like a prison. Everything is controlled, dictated by the husband figure. What to do, what to say, what to do, what to think even. But the fact that this cannot go on is also pointed out in the old playhouse. And here there is, there is one topic that I am going to discuss later on, that is the use of allusions. You remember Ibsen's famous play, The Doll's House, and there is a faint echo of the Doll's House in even in this poem, The Old Playhouse. You remember how the woman speaker says that the summer begins to fall. The husband figure wanted to keep her, that is the wife figure, in the summer of his love. But that passion, that attachment has now become constrictive, that has now become almost suffocating. And that's why she is now remembering the ruder bridges, the other ruder bridges, the bridge, other issues, the question of choice that is coming. Even in a poem like the Millionaires have made, there she talks both of the female bonding between herself and her now dead great grandmother. That woman died 18 years ago. Why? Because there was nothing mercenary in the love. She did not ask. That means the grandmother figure did not ask for anything. And this grandmother figure often recurs in Kamala Das's poetry. Okay. Compared to that grandmother, the male lovers, the male companions, their fire was that of the arsonists. They burned my cities down. Warmth was not their aim. So, sexuality often leads to surfeit, love's sad satiety. Understood? As the romantic poet would call it. Sometimes sexuality leads to apathy. Now I have become frigid. In autumn years, she refers to it. How she becomes frigid. She does not any longer feel any urge to engage in sex. So, this very common charge against Kamala Das that she was a poet of the erotica. Nelly Baseball calls her the love queen of Malabar. That aspect is there. Because she was a normal, healthy woman with healthy desires. But you have to understand one thing, that often she sings the body only to sing it away. Because body, even though necessary, is not the end of everything. It is not enough. Love is needed. Okay. Now, I am going to talk about another aspect of Kamala Das's poetic outcome. Just excuse me for 1 second. নিরুপম কতক্ষণ হয়েছে ডিসকাশন এখনো? আচ্ছা এইটা হলে আমাকে আবার বলবি কতক্ষণ হলো, এই ডিসকাশনটা হয়ে গেলে তারপরে আমি দেখবো যে কতক্ষণ এক নাগারে চালানো যাবে। এখানে কি কোনো রকম টাইম লিমিট আছে? আচ্ছা, তোরা কতক্ষণের ক্লাস করতে আগ্রহী? বলে ফেল, 1 ঘন্টার মধ্যে হয়ে গেলে সুবিধা হয় নাকি? আমার না সে নাম বলার দরকার নেই, 1 ঘন্টার মধ্যে শেষ করলে সুবিধা হবে, তাই তো? হ্যাঁ, একদিনে বেশি নেওয়াটা কঠিন। তাহলে আমরা আগে মেমোরিটা আগে হ্যান্ডেল করি। আচ্ছা, see, any discussion of Kamala Das's treatment of memory needs to be looked at from 2 perspectives. One, personal memory, and 2, collective. On another level, memory in Kamala Das's poetry can thematically be classified into two types. Traumatic memory that causes pain, and also happy memory that causes jubilation. Now, memory, we know, is both a faculty and a reconstruction. Brainologia can help us in improving our memory. That is a faculty. We all have the memory of our childhood. That is the reconstruction of the past. Now, memory, when we talk about individual memory and collective memory, why am I talking about that? Think about these 5 points. In these 5 points, there are poems where the speaker or the subject is presented in singular. For example, think about the old playhouse. Think about the millionaires at Marine Drive. Think about the peripheral insanity. But there are other poems where either the speaker or the subject are in the plural. Think about the descendants. And obviously, think about the eunuchs, the dance of the eunuchs. You will say, sir, but the speaker is not the eunuch, but the subject of the eunuchs. That is why this is called the dance of the eunuchs, not eunuchs. So obviously, you think about individual. The individual memory is that of the woman. There is a premarital chunk of that memory. You remember the endless pathways of the sky, the urge to fly and all that. There is also marital memory. The memory of the married life that the woman speaker had to endure. So far as peripuerperal insanity is concerned, you remember, even one word uttered in sudden hate can set me back to by all those years when she had born a child. So obviously, it's a memory poem. And it is about the memory of the woman. The memory of the woman about the doctors, about the newborn child, about the husband who, through his shredded meat of misery, could lead to the blooming of a sinister bloom. Pregnancy and childbirth. In Millionaires and Men in Drive also, it is the individual memory. You know, she remembers the grandmother with whom she shared a very, very peaceful and joyous life of mutual dependence and love without any selfish motive. But as opposed to this, there was also the memory of the arsonists, the male lovers who had burnt her city down. So I have, so far as individual memory is concerned, I have talked about both the old house, peripheral insanity, and this millionaires. As opposed to that, there is also collective. You remember the descendants? Descendants, not descendant. The women are descendants of such rebellious figures as Lilith or Ahalya, but they are also, surprise, surprise, descendants of the male gods. Buddha, Christ, Zarathustra, and so on. So obviously, the memory that she talks about is not only personal of her own, but also representative of her gendered equals, other women like her, because they had all spent their youth in intensity, in lying and everywhere. Understood? Okay, so far as traumatic memory and happy memories, so you think about the happy memories of the premarital times, the life that she had left behind, the woman persona of the speaker of the old playhouse. You think about the happy memories that the woman persona in the millennials at Marine Drive has of her life with her grandmother, who could understand her, who could love her, who could put an arm on her shoulder, love her, counsel her, caution her. But there are also traumatic memories of the eunuchs, because they can not have children, they cannot love, they are denied love and motherhood. They can only celebrate the birth of the children of others, children that they could not bear. They also sing of lovers dying or children left unborn. So this is an objectification of their own sad mental state, and that's why the memories that they bring up in their soul are also unhappy, traumatic memories. In the old playhouse, in the descendants, because she talks about youth, because she evidently writes from the perspective of lived experience, obviously memory can be discussed in that way. So your response to this should be structured first by defining memory, characterizing memory then, and then by talking about different kinds of memory, how differently memory has been classified, traumatic and happy memories on the one hand, individual and collective memories on the other hand. And then obviously we'll have to discuss the points in order to furnish cases in point. এরকম কতক্ষণ হলো ডিসকাশন? আরেকটা বোধহয় হয়ে যাবে না? কিরে আরেকটা চালাবো? তাহলে 4টে আজকে হয়ে গেলে আর 4টে কালকে হয়ে যেতে পারে, বা পরশুদিন হয়ে যেতে পারে। হোয়াট ইউ সে? একটা কাজ করি, আমরা একটা মানে ক্লোজ অ্যানালিসিস আজকে করে দিই, ওটা বেশিক্ষণ লাগবে না, কেননা ওর আলোচনা I have already discussed the points. So obviously I will only structure your response to such a topic. Now let us take up for discussion today the descendants. Already much of the text has been discussed from various perspectives: gender, sexuality, memory, then other things are there also. Since you are talking about the descendants, obviously you will have to talk about the images that she talks about. The crucifixion image, you know, remember, were nailed not to crosses. Obviously, cross is mentioned. Obviously, Christ is referred to directly or indirectly. Then, to soft beds and softer forms. So the image is not only ocular, related to sight, it is also tactile, related to touch. Okay. Okay. No God will step of the cross to show her his wound to us. Again, ocular. No God lost in silence will begin to talk. Obviously, the compassionate one is also mentioned. So, Buddha, Lord Buddha, Buddhadev, Jesus Christ, and also Zarathustra, the prophet of the curses. Just one second. Hello. Class needs you. Where was I? Yes, I was talking about Zarathustra. Now, you know, Zarathustra had revealed the wisdom that he had received from Ahura Mazda or Lord Wisdom. So obviously, it is auditory. So all these things are mentioned. All these things have to be mentioned. তাহলে একই সাথে we have not only discussed the images, we have also discussed the allusions that she has made use of in this point. Similarly, you will see that she actually refers to the encounter between the self and the soul. And that creates the dialogic in Kamala Das's poetry. When we actually engage in a dialogue, discursively speaking, as the Bhaktin has pointed out, it so happens that communication is one objective of discussion, dialogue. Similarly, there is another aspect of the dialogue. What is that? The contending voices, each one of the contending voices tries to, through logic, through force of argument, through the presence and personality, tries to make the dialogue a monologue in which the more dominant voice will brook no place for the less dominant one. We all know it is about the encounter between the self and the society from the perspective of the woman, because she is a woman poet. She is writing about the woman's life predominantly. So obviously, the encounter is between the categorizers. Society that can either accommodate or reject, promote or proscribe. Similarly, on the receiving side is the woman person who has to conform and be accommodated, or deviate and be shunned, rejected. Are you getting my point? See, if she conforms, she is promoted, accommodated by society. But if she deviates, she is given a cold shoulder And that is what is pointed out in the title poem of Kamala Das's second book of poems, that is the Descendants. So in today's discussion, I have tried to focus on four topics. I have tried to talk about Kamala Das's treatment of gender, of sexuality, of memory, and also Kamala Das's poem, The Descendants, has been analyzed to supplement the earlier discussion I have given you of this. So I have talked for quite a long time. So if you have any queries, you can ask them now. নিরুপম দেখ কে কে প্রশ্ন করতে চাইছে তাদের এক এক করে ইয়ে কর। কিন্তু সবাই একসাথে করবি না, একজন একজন করে করবি। যে নিরুপম কেউ কারো কি প্রশ্ন আছে মনে হচ্ছে? ইয়েতে কি কোনো চ্যাট বক্সে কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন এসছে? কে হ্যাঁ very good question. Even though it has got nothing to do with the discussion that I have given you today, Kamala Das actually felt uncomfortable in being called a feminist because firstly, Kamala Das says that a poet is responsible for both women and men. Kamala Das often tries to find out reasons for the way that male members of the society behave. In poems such as The House Builders, A Paradox, The Hot Moon in Malabar, the Colombo poems, Delhi 1984, the Dalit Panther. All these poems, Kamala Das has tried to point out how men are as much victims of patriarchy as are women. Kamala Das says that in her poetry, she wanted to present a picture of society. In one of her interviews given to P.P. Ravindran, Kamala Das has said that the poet is not only a personal poet but a chronicler of life. So if you have to chronicle or record life, you will have to talk about not only the good aspects of life but also about the bad aspects of life.